See, the bank officer didn't even knock. He shoved the foreclosure notice through the front door like it was garbage, let it fall on Clara's kitchen floor, and walked away without a single word. See, not one. She stood there in her worn house slippers, flour still on her hands from the biscuits she'd been making. Biscuits she didn't even have enough butter for, and stared at that yellow envelope like it was a snake coiled on her linoleum. See, 5 days. They were giving her 5 days before they took everything James had bled himself dry building. See, everything. If you were standing in those slippers right now, what would you do? See, if this story already has your heart pounding, subscribe to this channel right now, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. See, I want to see how far this story travels, because what happens next? Nobody saw coming. See, not even Clara. The envelope sat on the kitchen floor for a full hour before Clara picked it up. See, she wasn't avoiding it out of weakness. She'd faced worse mornings than this one. The morning James didn't come in from the south field. The morning the veterinarian told her she'd lose half the herd if she couldn't afford the medication. See, the morning her own sister called and told her to just sell and move to Phoenix and start over like losing a ranch was the same as losing a pair of shoes you'd grown tired of. See, Clara had faced all of those mornings. She'd made coffee on all of those mornings, and she'd gotten through them. See, but this morning she stood very still by the kitchen window and watched the dust from the bank officer's truck disappear down the long dirt road, and she let herself feel the full weight of it for exactly 60 seconds. See, she'd learned to do that after James died. Give the bad feeling its 60 seconds. See, then put it somewhere. She picked up the envelope. See, opened it, read every word. 5 days. Harold Whitlock, the bank's property inspector, would arrive at Silver Creek Ranch in 5 days to conduct what the letter called a formal assessment of asset viability. She knew what that meant. See, Harold Whitlock didn't come out to ranches to help them. See, he came out to document everything wrong so the bank had clean paperwork for the seizure. See, she'd heard what he'd done to the Dalton property over in Millhaven. See, 80 years of family history gone in an afternoon. See, Harold had written in his report that the Dalton barn showed structural instability consistent with long-term neglect. See, what he hadn't mentioned was that the Daltons had repaired that barn themselves 3 months earlier with lumber they'd bought on credit. See, but Harold's report didn't mention that. Clara folded the letter and set it on the table next to her cold coffee. See, the numbers were not complicated. The debt was real. See, James had taken a second lien on the property 4 years ago when the drought hit and they'd needed to restock. See, he'd meant to pay it down faster. He'd been planning on it. See, and then one Tuesday afternoon in October, he'd gone out to check the south fence line, and his heart had simply stopped, right there in the tall grass, and all his plans had stopped with him. See, Clara had been managing the debt since then, making partial payments when she could, calling the bank to explain, writing letters she typed herself on James's old typewriter because she thought typed letters seemed more serious than handwritten ones. See, none of it had been enough. She needed help. Real help. See, not her neighbor Bud Emerson driving over twice a week to check on her out of guilt. Bud was 68 years old and couldn't lift a fence post. See, not her cousin offering to send $100 from Tucson. See, she needed someone who knew how to work, someone who could stand in front of Harold Whitlock in 5 days and make this ranch look like a going operation instead of a slow collapse. See, she was still sitting with that thought, both hands wrapped around her cold coffee mug, when she heard the gate. See, it wasn't a car. It was footsteps slow, deliberate footsteps coming up her front path in a way that told her the person walking was tired, but trying not to show it. See, she watched through the window. A man, tall, lean in a way that wasn't by choice, the lean of someone who hadn't eaten properly in a while. See, he wore a canvas jacket that had seen too many seasons, and boots that were still good boots, the kind that lasted, even if everything else about him suggested things hadn't been lasting lately. See, he had a worn canvas bag over one shoulder, and he was carrying his hat in his hand instead of wearing it, which for reasons she couldn't quite explain made her take him slightly more seriously than she might have otherwise. See, men who took their hat off before they knocked usually had manners. See, manners cost nothing and meant something. He knocked 3 times. See, clean, even knocks. Not desperate pounding, not the tentative tap of someone who didn't expect an answer. See, Clara opened the door. He looked at her with dark, steady eyes that were tired but not beaten, and he said, "Ma'am, I'm looking for work." See, any kind of work. I can repair fence line, I can mend a barn roof, I can handle livestock, and I'll work from first light to last light for nothing more than a meal and a dry place to sleep. See, my name is Silas Hart. I'm not asking for charity. See, I'm asking for the chance to earn my keep. Clara looked at him for a long moment. See, most drifters who came to her door asked for food and said they'd work for it. See, they always took the food. They almost never stayed for the work. See, she'd learned that lesson 3 times in the past year. See, how long have you been walking? She asked. Something shifted in his face, not embarrassment exactly, more like the calculation of whether honesty was the right strategy. See, since yesterday morning, he said. From the crossroads outside Benton. See, that was 14 miles. You eat today? No, ma'am. See, she stepped back from the door. Come in, sit down at that table. See, he came in and sat exactly where she told him to, without looking around the house the way some men did, cataloging, assessing, sizing up what she had or didn't have. See, he kept his eyes level and his hat in his lap and his hands flat on the table. See, she put a plate in front of him, leftover beans, 2 biscuits, the last of the butter she'd been saving, and a glass of water. See, she watched him look at the food for just a half second before picking up the fork. See, that half second told her something. A man who pauses before he eats when he's that hungry either has very good manners or a very complicated relationship with accepting things from other people. See, either way, she noted it. He ate steadily, not frantically, and when he was done, he set the fork down and said, "Thank you." See, that was real food. Real food, not good food, not delicious food. See, real food. The kind of phrasing you only used if you'd been eating things that weren't. See, what kind of ranch work have you done? Clara asked, sitting down across from him. See, most kinds, he said. Started on my father's place in Wyoming when I was 9. See, cattle, mostly, but I've done some mixed operations. See, fence repair, roof work, basic carpentry. I can do most things if you show me what you need the first time. See, what happened to your father's place? It was a direct question, and she knew it. See, he didn't flinch. Bank took it, he said, 12 years ago. See, I was 22. Clara was quiet for a moment. You know what a bank inspector looks like when he's already made up his mind. See, something sharpened in his eyes. Yes, ma'am, I know exactly what that looks like. See, she got up and went to the kitchen window and looked out at the fence line she could see from there. See, 3 posts leaning, one section of wire so loose it was nearly down. See, the barn roof at the far end of the property, she couldn't see it from here, but she knew the east corner had been letting weather in since October. See, I have a bank inspector coming in 5 days, she said, still looking out the window. See, his name is Harold Whitlock. See, he works for the First Territorial Bank, and his job, his real job, not what it says on his business card, is to find everything wrong with this property and write it down so the bank has grounds to complete a foreclosure. See, she turned from the window and looked at Silas Hart. See, I have broken fences, a failing barn roof, cattle that are underfed, and financial records that are a disaster. Because my husband kept them in a shoebox, and my husband has been dead for 14 months. See, Silas Hart said nothing. He was listening with the kind of stillness that meant he understood the information was not finished yet. See, I also have a problem that's harder to fix than fence posts, Clara said. See, the bank doesn't believe a woman alone can run this property. See, Harold Whitlock has written that in reports before. See, I've seen what he writes. No capable second party present to demonstrate operational continuity. That's the language he uses. See, and the moment he writes that in his report, the refinancing dies and the foreclosure goes through regardless of anything else. See, she sat back down at the table. She looked at Silas Hart directly and without any performance of calmness she didn't feel. See, so here is what I'm going to say to you, she said, and I want you to understand that I have thought about this for less time than I should have, which is probably a sign of how desperate I am. But here it is. See, I need a husband. Not a real one. I mean, not one in the way that word usually means. See, I need someone who will stand on this property next to me when Harold Whitlock arrives and look like a man who belongs here. See, someone who can answer questions about cattle and fencing and operations without lying, because Harold is very good at detecting lies. See, someone who has worked this land for at least 5 days so that what they say is true. She paused. See, I'm proposing a marriage of arrangement, temporary. See, on paper, in exchange for exactly what you asked for: work, meals, and shelter. See, except that the work would include being my husband. See, the silence in the kitchen was the kind that had texture to it. See, Silas Hart looked at her for a long moment. His expression didn't collapse into shock or light up with anything she'd have found alarming. See, he looked like a man processing a serious offer made by a serious person. See, you'd be the one taking the bigger risk, he said finally. See, marrying someone you met 40 minutes ago. I know that. See, I could be anyone. You could, she agreed. But you're not, are you? See, he looked at her steadily. No, ma'am, I'm not. Then we have one rule, Clara said. See, just one. This arrangement stays an arrangement. No confusion about what it is. See, no, she paused, finding the word. No sentiment. See, we're two people trying to solve a problem, and when the problem is solved, we go back to being two people who don't owe each other anything. See, Silas nodded slowly. No love, he said. Clara felt something move in her chest at the way he said it, flat and plain, like a man acknowledging the rules of a card game. See, not sad, not wistful, just clear. No love, she confirmed. See, can you agree to that? Yes, he said. Then we need to go into Silver Creek tomorrow morning, Clara said, and we need to speak to Judge Hale before the bank opens. See, she stood up and began clearing the plate. Behind her, she heard Silas Hart set his hat on the table. See, it was a small sound, but for some reason it sounded permanent. See, she didn't turn around when she said, the barn is through the back. See, there's a room on the left side, used to be for equipment. See, it's dry. There are blankets in the chest. I'll find it, he said. See, she listened to him pick up his bag and walk through the back door. See, she listened to his footsteps cross the yard. She stood at the sink and listened until she couldn't hear them anymore, and then she turned and looked at the yellow bank envelope still sitting on the table next to his empty glass. See, 5 days. She thought about James and what he would have said about all of this. See, she thought he probably would have had something funny to say, something that would have made her feel slightly less like she's standing at the edge of a cliff with her eyes closed. See, James had always been able to do that. Find the funny in the terrible. See, but James wasn't here. What was here was a stranger sleeping in her equipment room, a bank inspector arriving in 5 days, and a marriage proposal she'd made to a man whose last name she'd only learned an hour ago. See, she washed the plate. She turned off the kitchen light. See, she walked to her bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed she hadn't been able to sleep all the way through in 14 months. See, she told herself she'd made the right decision. She told herself that twice. See, she wasn't sure she believed it yet, but she told herself it anyway, because some decisions you didn't get the luxury of certainty with. See, some decisions you made in the dark and hoped that come morning, the light would show you something worth getting up for. See, through her bedroom window she could see the light in the barn room flicker on. See, a single yellow square in all that black. She watched it for longer than she intended. See, then she lay down, pulled James's quilt up to her chin, and closed her eyes. See, outside, somewhere in the dark, a calf was calling for its mother. See, the sound was thin and persistent, and a little heartbreaking, the way only that particular sound could be. See, she'd feed them in the morning. She'd feed all of them in the morning. See, the morning after the quietest decision Clara Whitlock had ever made, she woke up before the sun and lay there in the dark, listening to the ranch breathe around her, the creak of the old house settling. See, the low murmur of wind moving through the gaps in the window frame she kept meaning to seal, and underneath all of it, the faint sound of movement in the barnyard. See, she got up and looked through the window. Silas Hart was already out there. See, it was still gray dark, the kind of morning where you could see shapes but not details, and he was moving along the east fence line with a post driver she didn't even remember owning. See, he'd found it somewhere in the barn, apparently, and he was working in silence with the slow, methodical rhythm of a man who'd done this kind of work so many times it had become something close to thoughtless. See, set the post, drive it, check the angle, move on, no wasted motion. See, no stopping to look around. Clara stood at the window with her arms crossed and watched him for a moment. She didn't plan to allow herself. See, then she went and made coffee. By the time she'd gotten dressed and poured 2 cups, the sun had started to come up properly, and she walked out to the fence line with both mugs and stood behind him until he sensed her there and turned around. See, he looked surprised, not alarmed, just surprised like a man who'd stopped expecting people to bring him things. See, she held out the mug. He took it. "You found the post driver," she said. See, it was behind the saddle rack. "Needs a new handle eventually, but it'll hold." See, she looked at the fence line. He'd already set 4 posts in the time it had taken her to sleep another 40 minutes and get dressed. See, the wire still sagged between them, but the structure was there now, real and firm, where before there'd been nothing but leaning timber and bad intentions. See, "We need to go into town this morning," she said. "Judge Hale keeps early hours on Tuesdays." See, Silas nodded, both hands around the mug. He hadn't shaved, and the stubble on his jaw was coming in darker than his hair, and he looked she noticed, and then decided she hadn't noticed like someone who belonged on this land in the early morning. See, like the land wasn't strange to him. That was either a good sign or a sign she was already lying to herself about what she was doing, and she wasn't going to examine that question any further before she'd finished her coffee. "See, I'll clean up," he said. "You've got an hour." See, he gave her a short nod and turned back to look at the fence posts he'd set, checking them one more time with the eye of someone who couldn't entirely leave a thing half done, even when he had permission to. See, she recognized that in him. James had been the same way. See, you'd call him in for supper, and he'd say yes, and then stand in the field for another 3 minutes, finishing something in his head that only he could see. See, she walked back to the house before that thought could settle anywhere. See, they drove into Silver Creek in her truck, which had a pull to the left she kept meaning to get fixed, and a radio that only worked when it felt like it. See, neither of them said much. See, the town was small enough that driving into it took less time than parking in a city, and Judge Hal's office was above the hardware store on the main street, accessible by an outside staircase that announced every footstep to anyone below. See, Judge Hale was 64 years old, had been a judge in Silver Creek for 22 of those years, and had the manner of a man who had long ago stopped being shocked by the things people needed from him. See, he looked at Clara, looked at Silas, looked at the bank letter she laid on his desk, and then looked at both of them again. See, "This is unusual," he said. "I know," Clara said. "You've known each other." He looked at the paperwork she'd started filling out. See, less than 24 hours, yes. He looked at Silas. "See, young man, is anyone compelling you to do this?" "No, sir," Silas said. "See, and you understand this is a legal marriage, not a handshake deal." "See, whatever arrangement you two have privately is your business, but what I'm about to do has real legal weight." "See, I understand," Silas said. So does she. Hale looked at Clara for a long moment. See, she met his eyes and didn't perform anything. No desperate justification, no apologetic smile. See, she just let him look. "All right," he said finally. See, he picked up his pen. "I've done stranger things for better reasons." See, the ceremony, if you could call it that, took 9 minutes. See, there was no music, no flowers, no one present except a deputy named Roy, who served as witness and spent most of the 9 minutes trying not to look like he was dying to tell someone about this. See, at the part where Hale asked if there were any impediments, the room was quiet enough that Clara could hear the hardware store owner moving stock around on the floor below them. See, Silas said I do in a voice that was steady and plain, the same voice he used for everything. See, Clara said it in a voice she didn't entirely recognize as her own. See, Hale signed the certificate, stamped it, and handed Clara the original. See, good luck with the inspector, he says, which meant the news about Harold Whitlock had already traveled, or that Hale was simply a man who understood why people did desperate things. See, they drove back to the ranch in the same quiet they'd driven out in. See, but the quiet was slightly different now. The way a room feels different when the furniture hasn't moved, but the light has changed. See, Clara pulled up to the barn and cut the engine and sat there for a moment. See, I want to say something, Silas said. She looked at him. See, I know what this is, he said. I'm not going to make it complicated. See, I'll work this land like it's mine, because for the next 5 days, keeping it standing is the only thing that matters. See, I won't, he stopped, seemed to be choosing words with more care than usual. See, I won't make you regret bringing me in. Clara looked at the crease in his jaw where he'd cut himself shaving. See, a small thing, almost nothing, but it made him seem more real than he'd seemed all morning. See, more human and less like a solution she'd conjured from her own desperation. See, good, she said, because starting right now, we have 4 days and about 18 hours. See, she got out of the truck and they went to work. The thing about saving a ranch in 4.5 days is that there's no romantic version of it. See, it's not a montage. See, it's mud and splinters and arguments about the fastest way to do something correctly versus the fastest way to do something badly that will hold together long enough for an inspector to miss it. And Clara refused the second option every. See, time Silas raised it, which he did once and only once. See, we can tack that board across the gap temporarily, he said, standing in the barn, looking at the east corner where weather had been coming in. See, Whitlock's not going to climb up there. He might, Clara said. See, Harold Whitlock is the kind of man who climbs up places he doesn't need to be because he knows people think he won't. She handed Silas the proper lumber. See, do it right. He looked at her for half a second longer than necessary. See, then he took the lumber. Okay, he said. Just that. See, it was the only time he pushed back on her judgment. See, by the end of the first full day, the east corner of the barn was structurally sound. See, the fence line along the south pasture had been fully reset, 16 posts in total, wire retightened and stapled. See, the cattle in the north pen had been fed, watered, and moved to better grass. See, Clara had found 3 bags of supplemental feed she'd forgotten were stacked in the back of the equipment room, and they'd rationed it carefully across the herd. See, she stood at the gate of the north pen at dusk and watched the cattle eat. See, they'll look better in 2 days, Silas said, coming to stand beside her. See, not too close. He maintained a careful physical distance that Clara noticed and was grateful for without wanting to examine why. See, they're not in bad shape, she said, slightly defensive. See, no, they're not, he agreed, but they've been a little hungry. See, you can see it in how they move. 2 days of good feed and they'll carry themselves differently. He paused. See, you've been managing this alone for over a year. The fact that they're this close to okay is it's not nothing, Clara. See, it was the first time he'd used her first name. She wasn't sure he'd meant to. See, he didn't apologize for it, and she didn't correct it, and they stood there watching the cattle eat until the light was gone. See, the second day brought the financial records. Clara had known this was coming and had been quietly dreading it more than the physical work. See, James had kept his accounts in a system that made complete sense to James, and virtually no one else a combination of a leather ledger that was only used for round numbers, a series of index cards held together with a rubber band. See, and a shoebox containing receipts going back 11 years that were organized, as far as Clara had ever been able to tell by the approximate emotional state James had been in on the day he filed them. See, she set it all on the kitchen table and looked at it. See, Silas sat down across from her, picked up the ledger, and opened it. See, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Did your husband have a system?" See, he had something he called a system. Silas looked at the index cards. See, he fanned them out. He picked up 3 receipts from the shoebox, looked at the dates, looked at the ledger entry for the same month, and then looked at the index card for that period. See, he was cross-referencing, Silas said slowly. The ledger is the official number. See, the index cards are the adjustments he made when the official number was wrong. See, and the receipts are the evidence for both. Clara stared at him. See, you got that in 30 seconds? My father did the same thing, Silas said. See, different color index cards. Same idea. Something moved across his face, gone before she could read it. See, took me 3 years to understand his system. I only figured it out after the bank took everything, which is the most useless possible time to understand something. See, he set the cards down carefully. We need to build something Whitlock can look at and not find holes in, he said. See, that means we need to reconcile the ledger against the receipts and create a clean summary page. See, something typed, not handwritten. Does that typewriter in the corner work? See, sometimes. Then we'd better start now. They worked until 11 o'clock that night. See, the kitchen table disappeared under organized piles, payments here, purchases there, a separate stack for anything related to the bank debt, another for veterinary costs, another for equipment. See, Clara typed the summary page on James's old machine with 2 fingers because she'd never learned to type properly. And this was not the moment to admit that, but Silas either didn't notice or decided not to mention it. See, he was good with numbers. Quiet good, the kind of competence that didn't announce itself. See, he'd look at a column, run a finger down it, and say something like, "This payment in March, did you mail it or deliver it?" And when she checked the receipt, she'd find the answer that matched what he'd already suspected. See, he was building a picture of the ranch's finances the way a person assembled something they'd broken before carefully, with the memory of how it was supposed to fit. See, at one point, Clara made a mistake on the summary page and pulled the paper out of the typewriter with more force than was strictly necessary, and the machine jammed, and she said a word she hadn't said out loud since the week after James's funeral. See, Silas kept his eyes on the ledger. The jam release lever is on the left side, he said, without any particular emphasis. See, she worked the lever. The machine released. She put in a new page. See, how did you know that, she asked. My mother had the same model. See, Clara put her hands in her lap and looked at the ceiling for a moment. See, then she put her hands back on the keys and kept typing. See, by day 3, the word had gotten around Silver Creek. See, Clara had expected this, or something like it, but she hadn't anticipated how quickly it would travel or how specifically it would travel. See, she drove into town for feed supplies, and within 11 minutes of parking, 2 women she barely knew had materialized beside her truck with the barely concealed energy of people who had been waiting for exactly this opportunity. See, we heard you got married, said Dottie Marsh, who ran the dry goods store and had opinions on everything in a 50-mile radius. See, I did, Clara said, loading a feed bag. To a stranger, said Dottie's companion, whose name Clara could never remember, delivered in a tone that was technically a statement but functioned as an accusation. To Silas Hart, Clara said. He's a rancher from Wyoming. See, nobody's heard of a Silas Hart from Wyoming. There are a lot of people in Wyoming nobody's heard of, Clara said pleasantly. See, that's roughly the defining characteristic of Wyoming. See, she loaded the rest of her supplies and drove away before either of them could find a second wind. See, but that wasn't the conversation that mattered. The conversation that mattered happened that afternoon, when a black car, not a truck, a car, see, which in Silver Creek was already a statement, pulled up the drive to the ranch, and a man in a pressed shirt and new boots got out and stood looking at the property with the particular expression of someone calculating things. See, his name was Douglas Vance. Clara had heard the name before, in the way you heard certain names around small communities, not from anyone who knew him directly, but from the echoes of his reputation arriving before he did. See, Douglas Vance was a land buyer. See, not the kind who bought family farms because he loved the land, the kind who showed up when land was about to be lost and offered people just enough money to feel like they'd made a choice when really they'd been steered into a corner. See, she came out to meet him before he could knock. He smiled at her. See, The smile was professional and warm in the way that things could be warm without generating any actual heat. "See, Mrs. Whitlock," he said, "my name is Douglas Vance. See, I represent an investment group interested in agricultural land in this county. See, I understand you may be at a crossroads with the property." "See, who told you that?" Clara said. The smile didn't waver. "See, these things get around." "They do," she agreed. "What's your offer?" "See, he named a figure. It was not a bad figure. It was, in fact, a figure that would have covered the entire bank debt with a reasonable sum left over, enough to start somewhere else, enough to breathe." See, she was not going to pretend to herself that she didn't feel the pull of it, the specific gravitational force of a number that solved a problem. See, she felt it for about 4 seconds. "No," she said. See, the smile shifted very slightly, something tightening at the corners. "See, I'd encourage you to think about it before you decide." "See, the bank inspector arrives in 2 days," Clara said. "See, I know when he arrives. And I know what happens after he leaves, if things go the way we're planning for them to go. See, you should probably drive back to wherever you drove here from, Mr. Vance." He looked past her at the barn, the fence line, the cattle in the north pen. See, his eyes were doing math she didn't want to watch. "See, the offer won't stay on the table indefinitely," he said. "See, I didn't ask it to," Clara said. He left. She watched the black car go down the road until the dust settled. See, when she turned around, Silas was standing in the barn doorway. See, she hadn't heard him come out. He was looking at her with the same steadiness he brought to everything, but there was something else in it, a question he wasn't asking. "See, land buyer," she said. I said no." "I know," he said. "See, I heard that too." She walked past him into the barn. "See, we need to finish the roof section before dinner." "See, come on." He followed her without another word, and the thing he wasn't saying stayed where he'd left it, somewhere between the barn doorway and the fading afternoon light. See, the night before Harold Whitlock was due to arrive, Clara couldn't sleep again. See, she got up at 2 in the morning and went to the kitchen and sat with the financial summary they'd spent 3 days building. See, she went through every page, every receipt cross-referenced. See, every payment documented. It was the best accounting of James's ranch records that had ever existed, better than James himself had managed, which would have both embarrassed and impressed him, she knew. See, she heard the barn-room door. A few minutes later, Silas was in the kitchen doorway. See, he had his boots on, but his jacket was open, the sleeves of his work shirt rolled down, but not buttoned. See, he looked at her, looked at the papers on the table, and then without saying anything went to the counter and poured himself a cup of the coffee she'd made. See, "Can't sleep?" he asked. No, he sat down across from her. See, he didn't try to reassure her. He didn't say it was going to be fine. See, she would have found either of those things irritating. See, instead he said, "What are you worried about specifically?" See, she thought about it. "Whitlock will look at the barn roof and find something. See, he can look at that roof from the ground, and the only thing he'll find is that it was recently repaired with appropriate materials," Silas said. "See, I matched the lumber correctly. The repair is solid. See, he'll ask about the cattle weight. They've had 3 days of full feed. See, the 2 that were worst off are already standing better. See, I'll have them in the front pen so they're the first ones he sees. See, he'll ask about the debt schedule. The summary is clear, documented, and presented in a way that makes the bank's own records look like they're missing something, which they probably are." Silas turned his coffee mug in his hands. "See, Clara, I'm not saying Whitlock won't find things. See, he'll find something. He always finds something because that's his job and he's good at it. See, but finding something minor is different from having grounds for foreclosure. See, we've moved this property from the second category to the first. See, that's what these 4 days were for." She looked at him across the table. See, the kitchen light was harsh at 2 in the morning, and it showed everything, the tiredness in both their faces. The flower she'd gotten on her sleeve at dinner and hadn't noticed until now, the small cut on his jaw that was almost healed. "See, you worked hard," she said. It came out differently than she meant it, to less formal. More like something you'd say to someone whose effort had genuinely moved you. See, he looked slightly uncomfortable with it, which she found oddly reassuring. See, a man who couldn't accept a simple acknowledgement without discomfort was a man who'd had to earn things without much acknowledgement for a long time. See, she understood that. So did you, he said, and then he looked at his coffee. See, she gathered the papers into their folder and stood up. See, I'm going to try to sleep, she said. Probably a good idea. See, she hesitated at the kitchen doorway. Silas. He looked up. See, for what it's worth, I think James would have liked you. She wasn't entirely sure why she said it, only that it was true, and sometimes true things needed to be said out loud, even when there was no clean reason for them. See, he respected people who worked without needing to talk about working. See, Silas was quiet for a moment. Thank you, he said. See, that means something. She went to bed. She slept. See, not all the way through and not peacefully, but she slept, which was more than most nights gave her. See, Harold Whitlock arrived at 9:47 in the morning, 13 minutes earlier than scheduled, which Clara suspected was deliberate. See, he drove a gray sedan, wore a tie, despite the fact that he was visiting a working ranch, and carried a leather clipboard that had the specific weight of official judgment. See, he was not a physically imposing man mid-50s, slightly soft around the middle, with careful eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. See, but Clara had been told enough about him to know that the absence of physical imposition was part of what made him effective. See, he looked like someone's accountant. He asked questions in the mild, organized way of someone filling out a form. See, and then he filed reports that ended careers and erased legacies, and he drove home and had dinner and went to bed and slept fine, because in his mind he was just doing his job accurately. See, Silas was standing in the yard when Whitlock's car pulled up. See, he had on his cleanest clothes, not dressed up, not trying to look like something he wasn't, just clean and present, and clearly a man who had been working this morning and had stopped to receive a visitor. See, there was dirt on his boots. Clara had told him not to clean it off. See, people who've been actually working have dirty boots, she'd said. See, people who are performing working have clean ones. See, so there was dirt on his boots, and he shook Whitlock's hand with the solid, unremarkable grip of a man whose hands were used to work, and he said, "Morning." See, Silas Hart. "I've been looking forward to getting this sorted out with you." See, Whitlock looked at him with those careful eyes. "You're Mrs." See, Whitlock's husband. "That's right. How long have you been at this property?" See, "Long enough to know where the problems were and what it took to fix them," Silas said, which was every word of it true. See, Whitlock looked at the barn. He looked at the fence line. See, he looked at the cattle in the front pen, who had been eating well for 3 days, and showed it. See, "I'd like to see the financial records," he said. "Of course," Clara said. See, "We've prepared a full summary with supporting documentation." See, "Come inside." They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Clara had eaten alone for 14 months, where she'd cried the night the vet bill came in. See, where she'd typed the summary in the middle of the night with 2 fingers, and Harold Whitlock went through every page. See, he was thorough. He was quiet. He went back and checked 3 specific receipts against the ledger entries and asked questions about 2 of the payment dates. See, Silas answered without hesitation, because they'd discussed this, because he knew these records now as well as she did. See, at one point Whitlock took off his glasses and cleaned them, which Clara had been warned was a sign he was either satisfied or building to something. See, she watched him put them back on. His expression was the expression of a man who'd come to find problems and was having a slightly harder time finding them than he'd planned. See, he stood up and asked to walk the property. They walked every inch of it. See, Whitlock looked at the barn roof from the ground and from a ladder Clara had set up, because she'd anticipated exactly this. See, he checked the fence line. He examined the water troughs, the hay storage, the equipment room. See, he asked Silas 3 questions about cattle management that were specifically designed to expose someone who was performing knowledge rather than having it. See, Silas answered all three correctly, and on the third one, added a detail about the specific grazing rotation he'd implemented in the last 4 days that made Whitlock look at him slightly differently. See, you moved them to the east pasture, Whitlock said, consulting his notes. See, the grass is further along there this time of year, Silas said. See, south pasture is good, but it's been grazed harder. See, give the east another 3 weeks and rotate back. See, Whitlock wrote something on his clipboard. They came back to the yard. See, the afternoon light was coming in low, and the ranch, the patched, exhausted, barely held together ranch that Clara had been fighting for alone, for over a year, looked almost settled in it. See, the fence post stood straight. The barn cast a clean shadow. See, the cattle moved without the anxious restlessness of hunger. See, Whitlock stood with his clipboard and looked at it all for a moment. See, then he looked at Clara. You've made significant improvements since the bank's last on-site review, he said. See, we have, Clara said. The structural concerns appear to have been addressed. See, they have. The livestock is in acceptable condition. See, better than acceptable, Silas said, which was the first unsolicited thing he'd said in the last 2 hours. See, Whitlock looked at him. Silas held the look without apology. See, you said acceptable. I'd say they're in good condition. See, there's a difference. Something moved at the corner of Whitlock's mouth. See, it wasn't quite a smile. It was the expression of a man who'd been challenged in a way that was technically true. See, good condition, he allowed, and wrote something else on his clipboard. See, he told them his report would be with the bank within 48 hours, and that the refinancing decision would follow from that. See, he shook both their hands. He got in his gray sedan. See, he drove away. Clara and Silas stood in the yard and watched the car go down the road, and neither of them said anything until the sound of the engine had completely faded, the way you didn't speak until the thing was fully gone. See, then Clara let out a breath that had apparently been in her chest since 9:47 that morning. See, the question about the grazing rotation, she said. See, he was testing you. I know, you actually moved them to the east pasture. See, 3 days ago. It was the right thing to do for the cattle, Silas said simply. See, the fact that it also gave me something to say to a bank inspector was a coincidence. See, Clara looked at him. He was still watching the road, even though the car was long gone, just looking at the direction it had come from, the way you looked at a door that had just closed. See, we won't know for 48 hours, she said. No, he agreed. See, so we keep working. He finally looked at her. What else would we do? See, she went in and made dinner, and Silas finished repairing the north gate latch that had been stiff since February, and Douglas Vance's black car did not come back that day. See, and the night settled over Silver Creek Ranch, the way nights did completely, without asking permission, with a cold edge that promised harder weather coming. See, Clara sat at the kitchen table after dinner with the folder of financial records in front of her and thought about all the things that could still go wrong. See, she was good at that. She had a detailed, thorough imagination for disaster, which was not an entirely bad quality in a person managing a ranch alone, but which was also not comfortable company in the quiet after dark. See, she heard Silas in the barn, moving something, doing some final task he'd decided needed doing before he called the day finished. See, the sound of work in the dark, coming from the direction of the barn, filtering through the kitchen window. See, she didn't know what the bank would say in 48 hours. See, she didn't know if Harold Whitlock had found enough in all his careful looking to give them what they needed. See, she knew the fence stood. She knew the barn roof held. See, she knew the cattle were eating. She knew the records were the clearest account of this land's history that had ever been put on paper. See, she knew a man had worked beside her for 4 days like he meant it. See, like he was not doing her a favor, but honoring a commitment, which was different. And she had come to understand in 14 months of doing things alone that the difference between a favor and a commitment was everything. See, she closed the folder. She turned off the kitchen light. See, she went to bed. Outside in the dark, the barn light stayed on a little longer. See, The 48 hours after Harold Whitlock drove away were the longest Clara had experienced since the week after James died, and that was saying something considerable. See, she worked. That was all she knew to do with waiting, fill it with something physical, something that had a beginning and an end, and a result you could see with your hands. See, she and Silas repaired the water line to the North Trough, which had been losing pressure since September. See, they replaced 3 sections of rotted board along the south pasture gate. See, she organized the equipment room in a way that would have made James laugh and possibly cry, because he had known where everything was in that apparent chaos, and she had never quite believed him until it was gone, and she couldn't find anything. See, Silas worked beside her through all of it. He didn't hover. See, he didn't ask her how she was doing. He assessed what needed doing and did it, and when he needed her input, he asked a specific question, and when he didn't, he left her alone. See, she had not fully understood until these days how much she valued that quality in a person, the ability to be present without crowding, to help without performing helpfulness. See, on the second day of waiting, the letter came. Not the good letter. See, not the refinancing approval. A different letter on First Territorial Bank stationery, signed by the bank manager, a man named Gerald Poole, whom Clara had spoken to 4 times on the telephone and never met in person. See, the letter informed her that while Mr. Whitlock's inspection report had noted material improvements to the property, she read that phrase 3 times, the bank's lending committee had decided to suspend the refinancing review pending further financial analysis. See, suspended, not denied, not approved. Suspended, which was the banking equivalent of a door left almost closed, not locked but not open, and giving no indication of which way it was going to move. See, Clara read the letter standing at the kitchen counter. See, she read it twice. Then she set it down very carefully, which was the thing she did when her instinct was to do something else entirely. See, Silas came in from the yard and looked at her face before he looked at the letter. "See, bad," he said. She slid it across the counter to him. See, he read it. His expression didn't shift much, but she'd spent enough days watching him now to read the small signals, the slight tightening across his shoulders, the way his eyes went back to the second paragraph a second time. See, suspended isn't denied, he said. "I know what it isn't," Clara said. "See, what is it?" He set the letter down. He looked at the far wall for a moment, the way he did when he was thinking through something fully before he said it. See, it means someone on that committee isn't ready to approve it, but doesn't have grounds to deny it either. See, which means Whitlock's report was good enough to block the denial, but whatever's in their financial analysis is still giving them a reason to pause. He looked at her. See, do you know what's in their analysis? Their version of our debt history, Clara said. See, which I've always believed was accurate. Have you ever checked it against your own records? See, she opened her mouth, closed it. She hadn't. She'd always accepted the bank's debt figure as the correct one because it was the bank's. See, the bank had the official numbers. The bank had the computers and the professional accountants and the systems. See, James had believed the same thing. You didn't question the bank's arithmetic, because the bank's arithmetic was the thing you were working against. Like gravity, you didn't argue with it. You just tried to manage it. See, we need to go through those receipts again, Silas said. See, we went through them already. We went through them to build a summary. See, we didn't go through them to audit the bank's debt calculation against your actual payment history. He was already moving toward the kitchen table. See, get the shoebox. The shoebox had been moved to the shelf above the typewriter. See, Clara got it down and put it on the table, and they sat across from each other again, the way they had 3 days ago, and started from the beginning. See, except this time they weren't building a picture of the ranch's finances. See, this time they were looking for something specific. Every payment Clara or James had made toward the bank debt, down to the last dollar, compared against what the bank claimed was still owed. See, it took most of the afternoon. The kitchen got dark around them, and Clara got up at some point and turned on the overhead light without either of them commenting on it. See, and Silas sorted receipts, and Clara cross-referenced against the summary they'd already built and the bank's own statements, and it was painstaking and boring and made Clara's eyes ache. See, but at about 7 in the evening, Silas stopped. He was holding a small bundle of receipts, 6 of them, paper clipped together, all from the same period, roughly 2.5 years ago. See, he laid them out in a row on the table and put the bank statement for the same period beside them. See, these payments, he said. Look at these dates. Clara leaned in. See, 6 payments, all made, all with receipts dated stamped, the bank's own cashier initials on 3 of them. See, but on the bank statement for that period, the debt balance didn't decrease the way it should have after 6 payments. See, she pulled the next statement, and the next. The payments were on the receipts. See, they weren't showing up correctly in the bank's running balance. See, they're there, Clara said slowly. The payments are there. See, but the balance doesn't reflect them, Silas finished. See, or doesn't reflect all of them. Look at October of that year. He put his finger on the receipt. See, James made a payment of $840. See, the bank's statement for November shows the balance decreasing by $200. See, not $840, $200. Clara stared at it. See, that's a $600 discrepancy on one payment, she said. See, in 1 month. His voice was careful. We haven't checked all of them yet. See, they checked all of them. It took another 2 hours. See, at the end of it, Clara had a handwritten column of numbers on a legal pad that she'd checked 3 times because she didn't trust herself to have gotten it right. See, payments made, payments credited, the difference between those 2 columns. See, the total difference was close to $4,000. See, not a rounding error, not a minor accounting gap. See, $4,000 in payments that James had made, that Clara had the receipts to prove that the bank had either never credited properly or had credited to the wrong account or had somehow, in 11 years of statements, see, failed to accurately reflect in the balance that had become the number hanging over everything. See, Clara sat back in her chair, $4,000 off a debt that had been paralyzing this ranch for over a year. See, $4,000 that changed the actual amount owed. See, $4,000 that might be enough to tip the refinancing calculation, might be enough to make the math work the way it needed to work. See, I need to take this to the bank, she said. Yes, Silas said. See, tomorrow morning, first thing. I'll drive you. See, no, she said it without thinking, and then understood why she'd said it. See, I need to do this part alone. This is between me and Gerald Poole and whatever his committee decides when they see what I've brought them. She looked at Silas. See, you understand that? He looked at her for a moment. See, something moved in his expression, not argument. Something quieter than that. See, yeah, he said. I understand. She gathered the receipts carefully, paper-clipped in chronological order, and placed them in the folder with the legal pad notes and the bank statement she'd been keeping. See, she'd typed a clean summary of the discrepancy before she went to bed, she decided. See, she'd type it clearly, with dates and amounts, and the difference spelled out in language that left no room for Gerald Poole to make it complicated. See, she was almost to the typewriter when the cold arrived. See, not metaphorically, actually. The temperature had been dropping all evening without either of them paying attention to it, and when Clara went to the window to check the sky, she saw the cloud cover that had moved in from the northwest. See, dense and low, and the particular shade of dark gray that anyone who'd spent enough winters in this part of the country recognized immediately. See, how much feed do we have, she said. Silas came to the window. See, he looked at the sky with the same recognition she had. See, 2 days, he said. Maybe 3 if we ration. And the long-range forecast? See, I didn't check today. She turned on the radio, worked the dial until she got the regional weather station, a signal that faded in and out through the static like someone trying to warn you from a great distance. See, what she caught was enough. Storm system moving in from the northwest, temperatures dropping significantly overnight, snow accumulation expected, roads in rural areas would be affected. See, affected was weather radio language for impassable. See, she turned the radio off. If the roads close, she said. See, I know. And the feed merchants in Silver Creek. See, I know, Silas said again. We should go tonight. See, before it hits. It's almost 9. Garvin's feed stays open late on Thursdays. See, it's Thursday. She grabbed her coat. They drove into Silver Creek in the truck with the leftward pull, the radio flickering in and out, the temperature outside already doing what the weather station had promised. See, Garvin's was still lit. The sign in the window said open, and old Pete Garvin himself was behind the counter doing his end-of-day accounting when they came through the door. See, Pete looked up. He looked at Clara. He looked at Silas. See, the particular quality of his look told Clara that whatever story Dottie Marsh had been circulating about the Whitlock Ranch had reached the feed store. See, evening, Clara, Pete said, stocking up before the storm. See, need 2 months supplemental, Clara said. Full blend. See, the cattle are getting their weight back, and I don't want to lose ground. See, Pete's expression shifted in a way she didn't immediately understand. See, he picked up his pencil and set it down again. Clara, I'm sorry to have to say this especially tonight, but you've got an outstanding balance here from August and September. See, I can't put more on account until that's settled. See, the August and September balance. She'd known about it and had been making partial payments and had told herself it was under control. See, it was not apparently entirely under control. How much, she said. See, he told her. It was not a catastrophic number. It was a number that, under ordinary circumstances, Clara could have managed. See, but right now, with the bank account stripped down to its essential minimum by 4 months of crisis management, the number sat just out of her reach. See, she stood at the counter and did the math in her head and came up $260 short. See, Pete, she started. I'm sorry, he said, and he genuinely seemed to be. See, I've got my own books to answer to. You understand that? See, she did. She did understand that. She was standing in a feed store at 9 in the evening before a winter storm because she understood exactly how books worked. See, she heard Silas move beside her. What's the outstanding balance total? He said to Pete. See, Pete told him. Silas reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out a worn leather wallet. See, he opened it and counted the bills inside carefully, without rushing, and placed them on the counter. See, Clara turned to look at him. The wallet, she noticed, was nearly flat now. See, not entirely empty, but close, Silas, she said. See, get the full order, he said to Pete. 2 months, full blend, same as she asked for. See, Silas. Her voice was different now. We can talk about it in the truck, he said, still looking at Pete. See, Pete looked at the money, looked at both of them, and started writing up the order. See, they loaded the feed bags in the truck bed while the first snow began just flurries yet, light and indecisive, but with the weight of more behind them. See, Clara lifted and loaded and didn't say anything because the parking lot of a feed store wasn't the place, and her hands were cold, and she needed to focus on getting the bags stacked correctly so they didn't shift on the drive back. See, in the truck, with the heater fighting its losing battle against the cold coming through the gaps to the door seals, she said that was almost everything you had. See, most of it, he agreed. Silas, that's your money. See, that's not ranch money. The cattle need feed. I could have figured something else out. See, in what time, he said it without edge. Just a question. See, the storm is coming tonight. Pete wasn't extending credit. See, the cattle need feed to hold their condition through a hard winter, or everything we've done in the last week doesn't matter. He looked at the road, both hands on the wheel. See, I had it. The need was there. That's not complicated. See, it is complicated, Clara said. You're supposed to be working for food and shelter. See, you are not supposed to be. She stopped, found the right words. See, you gave almost everything you have to save my cattle. See, our cattle, he said. The word landed in the truck cab and sat there. See, she didn't correct him. See, she didn't know why she didn't correct him, except that in the cold and the dark, with the snow starting to come down properly now, and the ranch waiting at the end of a road that would be difficult in the morning, and maybe worse by afternoon. See, the word our felt less like a mistake than like something he'd let slip that was true, in a way neither of them had officially acknowledged. See, she looked out the passenger window at the dark fields passing, and said nothing, and Silas drove. See, The storm arrived fully overnight. By morning, Silver Creek was under 8 inches of snow with more coming, the kind of quiet that deep snow made an absence of sound that was almost peaceful except for what was underneath it. Which was the specific anxiety of anyone whose livelihood depended on land they could no longer easily cross. Clara was up before dawn, already dressed, already calculating. The roads to town would be rough. The ranch road itself was manageable in the truck if you stayed in the tracks. But the south pasture access was going to be difficult, and the north water line needed to be checked because that particular line froze at temperatures the thermometer was currently reporting. She was pulling on her second boot when she heard Silas already in the yard. She looked through the window. He was clearing the path to the barn with the old snow shovel from the equipment room, working in the dark with a headlamp on, methodical as always. She watched him and felt something she had been carefully not feeling for several days. Something she didn't have a clean name for and wasn't going to try to name right now with a water line potentially frozen and cattle to feed and a bank in town she needed to reach before Gerald Poole had his morning meeting. She went out and they worked the morning together. The north water line had not frozen completely close, but not completely. Silas thawed the critical section with methods Clara would not have thought of quickly enough, and they got the water running again before the cattle needed their morning drink. The feeding took longer than usual because of the snow, but the animals were calm and eating well, and the supplemental feed from Garvin's made the difference in a way that was visible and immediate, and made both of them feel that the cold drive. Last night had been worth exactly what it had cost. By 10 o'clock, the roads were declared passable, barely, by the county radio station. I'm going to the bank, Clara said. Silas was wrapping a section of the water pipe with insulating tape, crouched in the cold beside the barn wall. Take the center track on the road, he said. The edges will be worse. I know how to drive in snow. I know you do. She drove to Silver Creek carefully, both hands on the wheel, and she thought about James as she drove, which she tried not to do too often, because it still had the power to undo her in ways she couldn't afford to be undone. She thought about James keeping those receipts for 11 years. She thought about him rubber banding the index cards together and putting them in a shoebox under the impression that this was a filing system. She thought about how he had trusted the bank's numbers without questioning them, the way she had trusted them, the way most people did, because who had the time or the knowledge to audit a bank's arithmetic? She thought about $4,000 sitting in a gap between what was paid and what was credited. Gerald Poole's office was on the second floor of the First Territorial Bank building, which was the nicest building in Silver Creek, and had been since 1931, when the town had decided that confidence in institutions required impressive architecture. Poole himself was behind his desk, a man in his early 60s who had the carefully neutral manner of someone who had spent a career delivering both good and bad news in exactly the same voice. He looked up when his assistant showed Clara in, Mrs. Whitlock, he said. I wasn't expecting you. No, she agreed. I wasn't either, until yesterday. She sat down in the chair across from his desk and placed the folder on his desk, not slid across, placed with intention. I need you to look at something. She walked him through it. Methodically, the way Silas had taught her by example over the last week, not frantically, not emotionally, just clearly. Here is a payment. Here is the receipt. Here is your bank statement for the same period. Here is the balance change that does not correspond to the payment made. She did this 6 times, once for each of the 6 problematic payments. Then she showed him the legal pad with the totals. Poole was quiet for a while. He had put on reading glasses and was going through the receipts one by one. And Clara watched him and did not fill the silence with anything, because she had said what she needed to say, and adding more words to it would only give him something to argue against. He picked up his phone. He called someone. He said, I need you to pull the payment ledger for the Whitlock account, the full history, going back to 2012. See. Yes, now. He hung up and looked at Clara. Give me 20 minutes. See. She sat in the chair for 20 minutes. The bank had carpet the color of old money and art on the walls that was trying to convey stability. See. She looked at her hands in her lap, at James's wedding ring she still wore on her right hand now that her left felt wrong for it, at the snow coming down outside the window behind Poole's shoulder. See. The assistant came back with a printout. Poole took it. See. He went through it with a pencil, checking dates, cross-referencing Clara's receipts. See. His face showed very little, but she watched his hands, which were less disciplined, slight tightening in the fingers when he found the first discrepancy, a stillness when he found the second. See. He took off his glasses. Mrs. Whitlock, he said. See. I want to be careful about how I characterize this before our accounting department has had a full chance to review it. He paused. See. But what I can tell you right now, looking at these two documents side by side, is that there appear to be crediting errors in your account history. See. Several of them. I cannot give you a final number today, but I can tell you that the errors, if they confirm what your receipts indicate, would represent a meaningful reduction in the actual balance owed. See. Clara kept her face still. How meaningful, she said. See. Potentially significant, Poole said. I want to have my accounting people confirm every figure before I say anything more specific. See. But I would ask you to leave these receipts with me originals, and I will have a response for you by end of business tomorrow. He looked at her with the careful eyes of a man managing several things at once. See. And I want to say I am sorry this wasn't caught sooner. See. However, it happened. It should have been caught sooner. See. Clara stood up. It would have been caught sooner if my husband hadn't died, she said. See. He was the one who kept the records. She picked up her coat. See. I'll have copies of those receipts made before I leave them with you. See. I'll be back with them within the hour. She drove to the library, which had the only public photocopier in Silver Creek. See. She made 2 copies of everything. She drove back to the bank and left the originals with Poole's assistant and drove home in the snow. See. When she got back to the ranch, Silas was in the barn, checking the feed situation, counting bags, calculating days of supply, the quiet arithmetic of keeping things alive through winter. See. He heard her truck, heard her footsteps on the barn floor, and turned around. See. She told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which she'd come to understand was one of his specific qualities, a full, genuine silence when someone was telling him something that mattered. See. No anticipatory nodding, no half-heard reassurances. See. He just listened. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. See. If the accounting comes back the way it looks, he said, what does that do to the refinancing calculation? See, it changes it, Clara said, significantly. The loan-to-value ratio shifts. See. The committee's concerns shift. She looked at him steadily. See. It might be the thing that makes it work. He nodded slowly. See. Then we wait for tomorrow, he said. We wait for tomorrow, she agreed. See. They went back to work, because waiting with nothing in your hands was worse than waiting with something to do, and there was always something to do on a ranch in winter. See. The storm had pushed more snow off the barn roof, and it had drifted against the north wall in a way that needed clearing before the weight became a concern. See. 2 of the younger cattle were showing mild signs of cold stress and needed to be moved to the covered pen. See. The water line needed to be rechecked in the afternoon because the temperature was dropping again. See. Late afternoon, while Clara was in the covered pen checking on the 2 younger animals, she heard Douglas Vance's black car before she saw it. See. The sound of a car on the ranch road was distinct, different from the truck, different from any working vehicle. See. She came out of the pen and stood in the snow and watched the black car park and Douglas Vance get out in his pressed shirt and his new boots with a coat that cost more than Clara's water heater. See. He looked at the snow, at the barn, at her. Difficult weather to be driving out here, she said. See. I wanted to make sure you'd considered my offer fully, Vance said. See. He was smiling, but it was the smile of someone who'd driven through a snowstorm to make a point. See. These winters can be hard on a property without the resources to manage them properly. See, I wouldn't want to see you in a more difficult position come spring. See, that's very thoughtful of you, Clara said. The offer is still available. See, I've held it longer than I normally would. Clara looked at him. See, Mr. Vance, I want to be honest with you since you've driven all this way. She pulled her coat tighter. See, I took some documents to the bank today. Documents that suggest the debt figure your offer is based on may be substantially incorrect. See, I think you should know that before you keep driving out here in bad weather. See, something changed in Vance's expression. Not the smile held, but something behind it, some calculation that had just been disrupted. See, what kind of documents, he said. Payment receipts, Clara said. See, 11 years of them. Turns out my husband was better at keeping records than the bank was at reading them. See, the smile was still there but thinner now, stretched over something that was no longer confident. See, these things take time to resolve, he said. Banks move slowly. See, in the meantime, Clara said, I'd like you to take that offer back to whoever sent you with it and tell them that Silver Creek Ranch is not available. See, she turned and walked back toward the barn. Vance said nothing else. See, she heard his car door, heard the engine, heard the car turn around on the ranch road and head back the way it had come. See, Silas was in the barn doorway when she got there. She was beginning to understand a particular talent for being in doorways at significant moments. See, he'll be back, Silas said. Maybe, Clara said. But he'll come back with less confidence. See, and confidence is most of what he had. She went into the barn to check the cattle. See, that night was quieter than any of the previous nights, had been not peaceful exactly, but different. See, the storm had settled into a steady, low snow rather than the heavy initial fall, and the ranch was insulated in it, the kind of winter quiet that was either comforting or oppressive, depending on how you were feeling when it arrived. See, Clara sat at the kitchen table after dinner with a cup of tea and thought about James's receipts in a folder on Gerald Poole's desk. See, she thought about how close she'd come, how many times in the last 2 weeks she'd been within arm's reach of losing everything. See, she thought about the morning the bank officer had shoved the foreclosure notice through the door without knocking, without a word, like she wasn't worth addressing directly. See, she thought about a man walking 14 miles to ask for work. See, Silas was at the table too, across from her, doing something she'd noticed him doing several evenings, a small, quiet task, his hands busy with something that wasn't ranch work. See, she looked and saw he was repairing a piece of leather harness with a needle and thread, the old kind of repair that most people didn't bother with anymore, the kind that took patience and good hands. See, that harness has been broken since last spring, Clara said. See, I found it in the equipment room. James kept meaning to fix it. See, Silas looked at the harness, then back at his stitching. See, it's good leather, worth fixing. She watched his hands for a moment. See, he had the kind of hands that showed their history not ugly, just marked. See, knuckle scars, the permanent shadow of outdoor work in the creases, a slight crook in the fourth finger of his left hand, where something had broken and healed without being properly set. See, Silas, she said, why did you leave Wyoming? He kept stitching for a moment. See, she'd asked something more personal than their arrangement technically called for, and she knew it, but she asked it anyway. See, nothing left to stay for, he said finally. After the bank took the ranch, my father, he didn't recover from it. See, not really. He held on for 3 more years, but he wasn't present for most of them. See, and when he was gone, there was no reason to stay in a place where everything reminded me of something that didn't exist anymore. He pulled the thread through carefully. See, so I went. Did some work here, some work there. Kept moving, because stopping felt like admitting that I didn't know where I was going. See, Clara looked at her tea. And then you came to my gate, she said. See, and then I came to your gate, he agreed. He tied off the thread and held the harness up, looking at the repair. See, I was running out of road, he said. That's the honest version. See, that's a lonely way to live, she said. She meant it without pity, just as a plain, accurate observation. See, he set the harness down. It was, he said, And then he looked at her with the steadiness that was one of his fixed characteristics that hadn't changed since the first evening. See, it's been less so lately. Clara looked at her tea. See, she did not look at him for a long moment. We have a rule, she said. See, her voice was steady. I know, he said. I meant it when I made it. See, I know that too. She picked up her tea and held it in both hands. See, outside the snow was still coming down, quiet and indifferent. See, the kitchen light was the same as it always was, harsh and honest, showing everything. See, I'm going to bed, she said. Good night, Clara. See, she stood up, rinsed her cup, and went to her room. See, she sat on the edge of the bed and looked at James's quilt and thought about a man who had come to her gate running out of road and had planted himself here instead, had given his last money for her cattle without being asked. See, had answered Harold Whitlock's questions with the confidence of someone who knew this land, because he'd spent every hour of the last week learning it the way you only learn things when they mattered to you. See, she thought about the rule she had made. She thought about whether the rule was protecting her from something that was actually dangerous, or protecting her from something that scared her precisely because it wasn't. See, she lay down, pulled the quilt up. Through the wall, she could hear nothing from the barn room. See, no movement, no sound, but the yellow light would be on, she knew. See, it was always the last light on, and it always stayed a little longer than it needed to. See, she didn't look at the window to check, she already knew. See, Gerald Poole called at 8:53 in the morning. See, Clara knew it was him before she picked up because the phone rang with the particular insistence of a call that had been thought about before being made 2 rings, a pause, then 2 more. See, like the person on the other end had picked up the receiver and then set it down and then picked it up again. See, she'd been up since 6, had already fed the cattle, had already checked the north water line. See, had already stood in the cold barn doorway looking at the snow-covered south pasture and running the same calculations she'd been running in her head for 2 weeks. See, the numbers were slightly different this morning. They had been slightly different since yesterday afternoon. See, she was trying not to let herself believe in them too completely until someone official confirmed them. See, she picked up the phone. Mrs. Whitlock, Poole said. See, I've had my accounting department working on this since yesterday afternoon. See, they finished the full review this morning. She stood at the kitchen counter with one hand flat on the surface and said nothing because there was nothing useful to say yet. See, the discrepancies you identified are confirmed, Poole said. See, in fact, our review found an additional error that wasn't in your original presentation, a payment from November of 2014 that was credited to a different account entirely. See, a clerical error from when we transitioned to our new system that year, a pause. See, Mrs. Whitlock, the actual verified balance on your account, accounting for all payments properly credited, is substantially lower than what you've been working from. See, he gave her the corrected number. She wrote it on the notepad by the phone. See, she looked at it. The difference between the number she'd been living under and the number she was looking at now was $3,840. See, not a fortune. But in the mathematics of a struggling ranch and a bank's lending ratios and a refinancing calculation, $3,840 was not a minor adjustment. See, it was the kind of adjustment that moved things from one category to another. See, I owe you an apology, Poole said. The bank owes you an apology. See, this should have been caught during routine account review, and it was not. See, no, Clara agreed. It was not. I've already contacted our lending committee, Poole said. See, given the corrected balance, the refinancing terms are viable. See, I'd like you to come in to sign the revised paperwork as soon as you're able to manage the roads. See, Clara looked at the number on the notepad. She looked at it for a long moment. See, I'll be there this afternoon, she said. She hung up the phone and stood very still for a moment, her hand still on the receiver, the kitchen quiet around her. See, then she walked to the back door and opened it and stood in the cold air at the top of the back steps. See, Silas was at the far end of the north fence line, doing something with the wire that she could see involved pliers and patience. See, he had his back to her. The snow was still on the ground, but the sky had cleared overnight, and the morning light was coming in clean and cold and made everything look sharper than it was. See, she cupped her hands around her mouth. Silas. He turned. See, come inside, she called. I need to talk to you. See, he read something in her voice or her posture, she wasn't sure which, and he started walking toward the house without finishing what he was doing, which he almost never did. See, she went back inside and stood at the kitchen table and waited, and when he came through the back door, still pulling off his work gloves, she turned the notepad around so he could see the number she'd written. See, he looked at it. She watched him understand it the way it moved through him, the quick internal calculation of what that number meant against the number they'd both been working from. See, his face didn't break into relief the way she'd imagined someone's face would. See, it got quieter instead, more still. Pool called, she said. See, they confirmed everything. The corrected balance changes the refinancing calculation. See, they want me to come in this afternoon to sign. Silas set his gloves on the counter. See, he looked at the number again. Then he looked at her. See, it worked, he said. Just that. Not triumphant, not loud. See, like a man confirming something he'd allowed himself to hope for, but hadn't let himself count on. See, it worked, Clara said. They stood in the kitchen on opposite sides of the table with the notepad between them, and the silence was the particular kind that didn't need filling because it already had everything in it. See, then Silas picked up his gloves. You should eat something before you drive in, he said. See, roads are still rough in spots. She almost laughed. See, she didn't quite, but it was close. The ranch is about to be saved, and you're telling me to eat breakfast. See, the ranch has been about to be saved for 2 weeks, he said. See, breakfast still matters. She made eggs. See, he sat at the table and drank coffee, and they talked about the North Water Line and whether the South pasture needed attention before the next freeze, and whether 2 of the younger cattle were gaining weight at the rate they should be. See, and it was the most ordinary conversation imaginable, and it felt, Clara thought, like something she hadn't had in a very long time. See, not the conversation itself, but the quality of it. See, the simple fact of another person at her kitchen table in the morning, talking about her land like it was a shared concern rather than her private emergency. See, she drove into Silver Creek at noon. See, the bank paperwork took an hour and a half, which was less time than she'd expected and more time than she had patience for. But she sat in Gerald Poole's office and read every page before she signed it, which she could tell slightly surprised him. See, and she asked 3 questions about the terms that he answered fully, and when it was done and her signature was on the documents and the refinancing was officially, legally, in writing, confirmed, Poole stood up and shook her hand. See, you're a thorough woman, Mrs. Whitlock, he said. See, my husband kept 11 years of receipts in a shoebox, she said. See, I owe thorough to him. She drove home. She was halfway back when she passed Douglas Vance's black car coming the other direction. See, she recognized the car before she could see who was driving, and she watched it pass in her rearview mirror going toward Silver Creek, probably toward the bank, probably to check on an investment opportunity that had just closed. See, she watched it disappear behind her and felt something she could only describe as the particular satisfaction of a door shutting on the right side. See, when she got back to the ranch, Silas was in the equipment room. See, she could hear him moving things, the sound of something being reorganized or repaired. See, she came to the doorway. He was packing, not dramatically. See, not everything at once. But the canvas bag he'd arrived with was open on the workbench, and 2 items that had been sitting on the shelf, a small folding knife, a spare pair of work socks, were beside it. See, it was the beginning of packing, early stages, but unmistakable. See, Clara stood in the doorway. Silas saw her and stopped. See, he didn't make any pretense of what he was doing. He just looked at her. See, it's signed, she said. Refinancing is confirmed. See, the foreclosure threat is gone. She kept her voice even. See, the land buyer has no leverage anymore. Good, Silas said. See, he said it with complete sincerity. That's Clara. That's everything. See, it is, she said. She looked at the bag. at the knife and the socks on the workbench. See, you're getting ready to go. He didn't deny it. Our agreement was until the ranch situation was resolved. See, it's resolved, yes. She looked at the bag for another moment. See, I know. She went back into the house. That evening was the strangest one they'd had since the night before Judge Hale's office, when Clara had lain awake telling herself she'd made the right decision. See, they ate dinner in the kitchen. See, the same table. See, the same chairs. See, the same overhead light. See, Silas had made the meal he'd been doing that 3 or 4 nights a week for the past 2 weeks, taking it on quietly the way he took on most things, without announcement, a simple beef stew from what was left in the cold storage. See, with the last of the bread she'd baked on Sunday, they ate without saying much. See, it wasn't the comfortable silence of the past 2 weeks. See, it was a silence that both of them were aware of, that had a shape to it, that sat between them on the table as clearly as the salt shaker. See, halfway through the meal, Clara said, "Where will you go?" See, Silas looked at his bowl. North, maybe. There's usually work available on the bigger spreads in Montana once the worst of winter passes. See, I've worked that territory before. Montana, she said the word the way you said a place that was real but far. See, that's a long way to walk. Something pulled at the corner of his mouth. See, almost a smile. I'll find a truck to hitch with. I usually do. See, she pushed a piece of carrot around her bowl. You should have some of what's in the account, she said. See, for what you contributed. It's not right that you. See. No, he said. No, he said again, and his voice was quiet but completely final. See, that's not why I worked here. Then why did you? See, she asked it simply, the way she'd been asking him things for 2 weeks, directly and without softening it into something more polite than it was. See, she looked at him across the table and waited. He was quiet for a moment that stretched. See, he set down his spoon. When I came to your gate, he said slowly, I was a man who'd been moving for long enough that I'd stopped noticing I wasn't going anywhere. See, I was just moving. See, and I came to your gate because I'd run out of road and I needed food, and I thought maybe one more day of work would be one more day of purpose, which is a pretty thin version of a life, but it was what I had. He looked at his hands on the table. See, and then you offered me something I wasn't expecting. See, a marriage deal, she said. No, he said, something to fight for. He looked up at her. See, I haven't had anything worth fighting for in a long time, Clara. See, not since the bank took my father's ranch. And fighting for yours, working this land, fixing what was broken, sitting at this table, going through those receipts, it felt like something. See, something real, like I was a person again, instead of just someone passing through. See, the kitchen was very quiet. You are a person, Clara said, and her voice came out lower than she intended. See, I know that now, he said. That's what I mean. She looked at him across the table and thought about all the things she could say and all the things the rule she'd made said she shouldn't. See, she thought about the rule very carefully because she was a woman who believed in keeping her word, who had always believed in keeping her word, who had made the rule with entirely good reasons that she'd been very sure of at the time. See, she was slightly less sure of them now. You should sleep, she said finally. See, if you're leaving tomorrow. I didn't say tomorrow. See, when? He looked at her. I'm not sure, he said. See, soon. When the time is right. She nodded and cleared the dishes and washed them at the sink and listened to him push back from the table and walk to the back door. See, he paused there. Clara, she turned. See, he was standing with his hand on the doorframe, and for a moment he looked like the man who'd appeared at her gate, tired but not beaten, steady in a way that had nothing to do with certainty and everything to do with character. See, for what it's worth. Whatever the rule was, this was worth it. See, he went out. She turned back to the sink and stood there with her hands in the warm water for a while. See, 3 days passed. Silas did not leave. He didn't announce that he was staying. See, he didn't say anything about it. He just kept working. See, he finished the north gate completely, the latch, the hinge, the post that had been listing since before Clara could remember. See, he restrung the wire on the east side of the property where the deer had been pushing through. See, he repaired the section of barn floor that had soft spots replacing 3 boards entirely and reinforcing 2 others, doing it correctly from underneath so the repair would last. See, Clara watched all of this and said nothing about it because she didn't know what to say. See, she'd told him he was free to go. He was free to go. See, she wasn't asking him to stay. She wasn't sure what she was doing, except going about the business of the ranch, the same as always, which now included a man in the equipment room who apparently wasn't finished yet. See, on the 4th day after the signing, she went through the remaining boxes from James's office. See, she'd been putting this off for over a year. The boxes were stacked in the corner of what had been James's small office off the main room, 3 cardboard boxes, miscellaneous, containing the parts of James's working life that didn't fit in the ledger or the shoebox or any other organizational system. See, she'd avoided them because going through a dead person's things was the particular emotional work that couldn't be rushed or deferred indefinitely, but could certainly be deferred for 14 months. See, she started with the top box, mostly ranch records, old supply invoices, equipment warranties for things that were either gone or broken, a manual for a tractor they'd sold in 2016. See, she made a pile for trash, a pile to keep, a pile to examine more carefully. See, she was methodical about it. She had learned from the shoebox experience to be methodical. See, Silas appeared in the doorway at some point. She wasn't sure how long she'd been at it. See, he looked at the boxes. See, looked at her. See, and said, "Do you want help?" See, "Pull up that chair," she said. He did. They went through the boxes together, which was both easier and harder than doing it alone easier because 2 pairs of eyes process things faster. See, harder because every item that had obviously been James's in a personal way, a worn pocket notebook, a photograph of the cattle from 2011 when the herd had been at its peak. See, a child's drawing from a nephew's visit landed differently with someone else present. See, like it was more real. Like James was more gone when witnessed than when private. See, she handled those items carefully. Silas was respectful of them without being awkward about it, which was the correct instinct. See, near the bottom of the second box, under a layer of old equipment catalogs, Clara's hand found a manila envelope that was sealed and had no label on it. See, she turned it over. Nothing on the back either. She looked at the flap sealed with tape, not the envelope's own gum, which meant it had been deliberately sealed after the fact. See, she opened it. Inside were documents, several pages of what appeared to be correspondence, and underneath them, a stack of receipts, rubber banded together with a note in James's handwriting on top. See, she read the note. Her hand slowed. She read it again. "See, Silas," she said. Something in her voice made him stop what he was doing immediately. See, he looked over. She held out the note. He took it and read it. See, his expression shifted through something she couldn't quite categorize: recognition, followed by something serious. See, the note said, in James's small, precise handwriting, "These receipts are the payments I made through the secondary account, the one I opened in 2013, when the first account had the service freeze." See, banks said they'd consolidate them. Never confirmed they did. See, keep these. Clara, if you find this, these are real. See, make them look. She took the receipts out of the envelope. See, there were 9 of them, made over 14 months in 2013 and 2004, from an account number she didn't recognize, but James's name was on everyone, and the bank's name was on everyone, and the amounts were real and dated and stamped. See, a secondary account, she said, that he opened during a service issue, Silas said. See, he was looking at the receipts carefully, not touching them, but reading the figures. See, and the bank was supposed to consolidate the payment history. See, and apparently didn't. He sat back. "Do you know what those 9 payments add up to?" See, she was already adding. She had a pen in her hand, and she was writing the amounts on the back of an old invoice, the nearest paper available, adding as she went. See, she got to the end and looked at the total. $6,200, she said. See, her voice sounded strange to her, flat and controlled in the way voices got when the thing they were conveying was too large for a normal register. See, Silas said nothing for a moment. "Clara," he said finally. "See, that's not a bookkeeping error. That's not a crediting mistake. See, that's $6,200 in payments the bank has no record of because they were never consolidated the way they promised. See, I know what it is, she said. On top of the corrections you already made. See, I know. She sat with the receipts in her hands and felt the specific vertigo of a situation that had just tilted further than she'd expected further in the right direction, which was its own kind of disorienting. See, she had come into this office to go through James's boxes as an act of overdue emotional maintenance. See, she had found something that changed the financial picture of the ranch in a way she hadn't imagined possible even 2 hours ago. See, she looked at the note in James's handwriting again. See, Clara, if you find this, these are real. Make them look. See, he'd known, or he'd suspected. He'd had the receipts and the concern and the instinct that something wasn't right, and then his heart had stopped in the south field on a Tuesday afternoon in October. See, and the envelope had sat in the box under the equipment catalogs for 14 months, waiting. See, she pressed the back of her hand against her mouth for a moment. See, just a moment. Silas waited. He didn't put a hand on her shoulder or say that she was going to be all right. See, he just sat in the chair beside her and was present, which was exactly the right thing. See, she lowered her hand. I need to call Poole, she said. See, yes, today, before end of business. It's 2 o'clock, Silas said. See, you have time, she Gerald Poole's direct line. See, she explained what she'd found calmly, with dates, with account numbers, with the specific language of James's note. See, she heard Poole go quiet on the other end of the way he'd gone quiet the first time. Except this time the quality of the quiet was different. See, this time it sounded less like calculation and more like a man absorbing something he didn't know how to receive. See, I'll need to see them, Poole said. I'll bring copies tomorrow morning, Clara said. See, and I'm keeping the originals. After she hung up, she and Silas went back to the boxes. See, they finished going through all 3 of them. They made their piles trash, keep, examine. See, they were careful with every piece of paper because they now understood that James's paper trail was not the chaos it appeared to be, but the archive of a careful man who simply hadn't lived long enough to explain his own system. See, they found nothing else significant, but they went through it all anyway because now they knew to look. See, at the end of the afternoon, see, the boxes were sorted. See, the papers organized. See, the trash bagged. See, Clara sat in James's chair with the manila envelope in her lap. See, he knew something was wrong, she said. He just didn't know what it was or how bad. See, he kept the evidence, Silas said. That's what mattered. See, if I'd gone through these boxes 6 months ago. See, but you didn't, Silas said. Not harshly, just the fact of it. See, and you went through them today, and you found them today. See, she looked at the envelope. He left me a note, she said. See, in all those boxes of old invoices and tractor manuals, he left me a note on top of the receipts that told me what they were. She paused. See, he knew I'd be the one to look eventually. He knew I wouldn't give up on this place. See, she got up and went to the window and stood there looking out at the ranch, the fence line that stood straight now, the barn with its repaired roof, the north pen where the cattle were calm and eating. See, the property looked different than it had. On the morning the bank officer had dropped the foreclosure notice on her kitchen floor. See, not because everything had been transformed, it was still a working ranch with all the dents and worn patches that meant, but because the things that had been failing were standing again. See, behind her, she heard Silas stand up from the chair. See, I'll start dinner, he said. She turned. He was at the doorway. See, she looked at him, this man who had shown up at her gate 14 miles from anywhere on feet that were almost done, who had worked her land like it was his own, without ever claiming that it was. See, who had given his last money for her cattle and sat with her at 2 a.m. when the worry was too large for sleeping, who had been present in the specific way that mattered, which was not loudly, not with gestures, but with constancy. See, she thought about the packing she'd seen, the knife and the socks on the workbench. See, Silas, she said. He stopped. I don't want you to go, she said it plainly. See, she was a plain-speaking woman, and she had always been better at plain speech than at the decorative kind, even when the plain speech cost her something. See, I know what we agreed. I know what the rule was. But I'm telling you the truth, which is that I don't want you to go, and I think you should know that before you make a decision about Montana. See, his expression was very still. He was looking at her the way he looked at things that required his full attention. See, Clara, he said carefully. You don't have to say anything right now, she said. See, I'm not asking for anything. I'm just telling you. See, because James always said that the worst thing you could do was leave something true unsaid and have to wonder later if it mattered. She looked at the envelope in her hands. See, he was usually right about things like that. She walked past him toward the kitchen. See, she put water on. She got out what they needed for dinner. See, she kept her hands busy because her hands knew what to do, even when the rest of her was not entirely sure, and she was grateful for that. See, she heard Silas behind her. He didn't leave the doorway immediately. See, she could feel him standing there in the particular way she'd learned to sense his presence, the density of him in a room, the way the air changed when he was near. See, then she heard him come into the kitchen. He didn't say anything for a moment. See, he picked up the cutting board and took the potatoes from the counter and began cutting them, standing at the counter next to her, close enough that she was aware of his shoulder 6 inches from hers. See, then he said, quietly, without drama, as if he were saying something they'd both already known and were only now getting around to acknowledging, I don't want to go either. See, she didn't turn around. She kept her hands on the pot she was filling at the sink. See, all right, she said. All right, he said. They made dinner. See, it was not a simple dinner by the standard of what they usually managed. Silas cut the potatoes correctly. Clara burned the edge of the bread again, the way she always did. The stove had its usual problem with the left rear burner running too hot. See, and neither of them was particularly graceful about navigating the small kitchen at the same time. See, their elbows collided once. He said sorry. She said it was fine. See, it was in fact fine. They ate at the table. See, the conversation came more easily than it had the night before, not because anything had been resolved or decided or officially changed, but because something that had been held at a careful distance had been allowed a few inches closer. See, and sometimes that was enough to make a room feel different. See, she told him about the secondary account, about what she'd understood, looking at the dates that James had been worried about the bank's record-keeping as far back as 2013. See, that he'd been leaving himself documentation the same way he'd always left himself documentation, methodically and without fanfare, in a shoebox or an envelope or a rubber-banded stack of receipts. See, he sounds like someone worth knowing, Silas said. See, he was, Clara said. And she meant it without grief this time, just as a plain, accurate fact about a man who deserved better than 47 years and a Tuesday in October. See, he would have liked arguing with you, she said. He loved a good argument with someone who actually knew what they were talking about. See, I would have given him one, Silas said. She believed it. See, after dinner, he went out to check the cattle one more time, the habit of the last 3 weeks, the last task of the day, the walk to the North Pen and back that he'd taken on without being asked and hadn't stopped. See, she washed the dishes and listened to the back door close, and his footsteps crossed the yard, and she thought about Gerald Poole and the documents that were going back to the bank tomorrow morning. See, and she thought about $6,200 sitting in a sealed envelope for 14 months, waiting for someone to look. See, James had always believed she'd look. She dried the last dish and hung the towel. See, through the kitchen window she could see the light in the North Pen. Silas flashed, moving between the cattle, checking on the 2 younger ones that had been cold-stressed during the storm. See, the light moved steadily, no hurry. Just the last task of the day done with the same care as everything else. See, she turned off the kitchen light and went to the window and watched the light in the North Pen move for a while in the dark. See, he'd said he didn't want to go. She'd said all right. See, that was not a declaration. That was not a plan. That was not anything that changed the fundamental uncertainty of 2 people who had come together for practical reasons and found themselves in entirely impractical territory. See, But it was true, which was the thing that mattered most, and they had both said it out loud, which meant it existed now in the world beyond just their individual, private knowledge of it. See, tomorrow she'd drive to the bank. She'd put James's 9 receipts on Gerald Poole's desk. See, she'd watch Poole do the math that meant the remaining debt, already reduced, already manageable, would become something smaller still, possibly something that could be handled without the refinancing drama. See, possibly something that fundamentally altered the picture of the ranch's future. See, she'd do all of that tomorrow. Tonight, the North Penn light went out, and a minute later she heard the barn room door, and a minute after that, the yellow light in the barn room window came on, the last light on the property still burning. See, she stood at the kitchen window a moment longer than she needed to. See, then she went to bed. The morning Clara drove James's 9 receipts to the bank. She wore the same coat she'd been wearing since November, the one with the frayed left cuff she kept meaning to replace and never did. See, she noticed the fraying when she put it on, the way she noticed it every morning, and every morning she made the same small mental note and then forgot it by the time she'd gotten to the barn. See, some things persisted not because they were acceptable, but because there was always something more urgent. And the coat was warm enough, and the cuff was frayed but not broken, and that was a reasonable description of a lot of things in her life. See, she told Silas she'd be back by noon. He was already at the water line when she left, replacing a section of pipe that had cracked during the worst of the freeze. See, he had his tools laid out in the order he always laid them, not obsessively, just practically, the way a person worked when they'd learned that losing track of tools cost time they didn't have. See, he looked up when she came out to the truck, looked at the folder under her arm, and gave her a single nod. See, she drove to Silver Creek with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. See, Gerald Poole was expecting her. His assistant showed her straight in, which was different from her first unannounced visit, different from the general quality of how she'd been received at this bank over the past 14 months. See, she noticed the difference and chose not to read too much into it, because the meeting hadn't happened yet, and she had learned the hard way that things that looked resolved had a way of finding new complications. See, she put the copies on Poole's desk, originals in the folder on her lap. See, she walked him through each receipt, the same way she'd done it on the phone dates, account numbers, amounts, the consolidation request James had made in writing in the spring of 2013, which she had also found in the box, which she had also copied. See, Poole was quieter this time than he'd been during the first accounting review. See, he looked at the consolidation request for a long moment. See, she watched his jaw tighten slightly. "This is a written request," he said. See, "Yes," Clara said, with the date and the signature of the branch manager who received it. She paused. "See, a manager who, I believe, no longer works here." Poole looked at her over his glasses. "See, no. He retired in 2016. I thought that might be the case." See, there was a silence that had a specific weight to it, the weight of an institution recognizing that it had a problem, and that the problem was documented, and that the woman sitting across the desk had the documents. See, "I'll need to take this to our compliance office," Poole said. See, "This goes beyond account reconciliation. A written consolidation request that was never fulfilled, that's a different category of issue." See, "I understand that," Clara said. "I'm not here to create problems for the bank, Mr. See, Poole. I'm here to get this resolved correctly. If the compliance process takes time, that's fine. See, but I want clarity on the timeline, and I want written acknowledgement today that these receipts have been received and are under formal review." See, Poole looked at her the way people occasionally looked at Clara when they had underestimated her, not unkindly, just with a recalibration happening visibly behind their eyes. "See, I'll have my assistant prepare the acknowledgement before you leave," he said. "See, thank you." She got the acknowledgement. She drove home. See, she was back at the ranch by 11:47, which was before noon, which she noted with a private satisfaction because she had said she'd be back by noon, and she was a woman who meant what she said. See, Silas had finished the pipe repair and was eating a sandwich at the kitchen table when she came in. See, he'd made 2-1 for himself, 1 for her on the counter under a dish towel. See, she saw this and said nothing about it and sat down and ate it, and she told him what Poole had said and what the compliance process meant and what the timeline would look like. See, how long? Silas asked. Poole said 2 weeks for the compliance review. See, then they recalculate the balance with the 9 payments properly applied. See, then we go back to the lending committee with the corrected figures. She picked up her sandwich. See, but he said, and he said this carefully, the way he says, everything that based on what he's seeing, the corrected balance combined with the refinancing already approved would put the debt at a level the ranch can genuinely service. See, not comfortably, not without work, but genuinely. See, Silas was quiet for a moment. Genuinely, he repeated. See, like the word meant something particular to him. Genuinely, Clara confirmed. See, which is different from barely, which is different from on paper. See, he nodded. He looked at the table, then back at her. See, then it's going to be okay, he said. She'd heard those words before from people who meant well and were wrong. See, from her sister in Phoenix, from Bud Emerson, from the loan officer who'd told J. James 3 years ago that the refinancing would be straightforward. See, those 5 words had, over the past year, accumulated a kind of toxicity for her, not because people were lying when they said them, but because they were almost always saying them instead of helping. See, when Silas said them, they sounded different, possibly because he'd been the one working the land for 3 weeks. See, possibly because he had personal knowledge of what okay and not okay looked like from the inside of a failing ranch. See, possibly because he'd never once in 3 weeks said things were going to be fine when they weren't clearly moving in that direction. See, yeah, she said, I think it is. The 2 weeks that followed were the strangest of all the strange weeks that had made up the past month, because they were almost ordinary. See, the acute crisis had passed not fully resolved, but moved from emergency to process, which was its own kind of relief. See, the paperwork was in motion, the compliance review was happening. See, the ranch itself was, for the first time in over a year, functioning at a level that was sustainable rather than desperate. See, which meant that Clara and Silas were doing ranch work without the urgency of catastrophe underneath it. See, just work. The daily work of keeping a cattle operation alive through winter feeding, checking water, monitoring the herd's health, keeping the structures standing, watching the weather, see, making decisions about grazing and nutrition, and the 100 small things that added up to either a viable operation or a slow failure. See, it was different, doing that work together without the 5-day countdown, or the bank inspector's visit, or the fever pitch of the financial crisis. See, more ordinary, which meant more revealing. You learned things about a person when there was no emergency to focus on. See, when there was just the work itself and the day and the conversation that happened around it. See, she learned that Silas woke up earlier than she did, nearly always, and that he used the first half hour of the day to simply walk the perimeter of the property in whatever light was available. See, checking things she couldn't always identify, but that he seemed to understand by instinct the set of the fence, the mood of the cattle, the particular quality of the cold that told you something about what the day would ask of you. See, she'd asked him about it once, and he'd said it was something his father had done, and he'd picked it up without deciding to, and now he couldn't start the day without it. See, she learned that he read when he thought no one was paying attention, had a worn paperback he kept in the barn room, something she'd caught him with twice in the evenings when she'd come out to check the cattle later than usual. See, she'd seen enough of the cover to recognize it as a history of the Great Plains drought years, which struck her as either very pragmatic or a particularly personal form of masochism, and possibly both. See, she learned that he had opinions about things that surprised her, not about the ranch, where his opinions were always welcome and often right, but about other things. See, he had a quiet but decided view on the question of what made a place worth belonging to, which they'd arrived at sideways one evening while talking about a town she'd driven through once in New Mexico. See, He had a specific appreciation for music that he never volunteered but revealed when the radio happened to land on something he recognized, his hand on the coffee mug going slightly still in a way she'd learned to read. See, he learned her too. She could feel it happening, the careful attention he paid to her moods without making them a subject of conversation. See, he knew when she was worried about something specific versus when she was tired, versus when she was in the particular withdrawn state. That meant she was thinking about James. See, he never tried to fix the last one, which was the correct instinct. See, he'd make coffee and leave it near her and give her the room the thinking needed and not ask about it until she brought it up herself, if she brought it up. See, she brought it up more often than she expected. "Do you think he knew?" she said one evening. See, it was early February, 3 weeks into the compliance process, and they were sitting at the kitchen table with the remnants of dinner still between them and a cold that had settled into the county for what the radio was calling an extended period. See, James. About the receipts, whether he actually suspected the bank had made errors or whether he was just being cautious the way he always was. See, Silas considered it. The note he wrote, he said. See, that wasn't a careful man covering his bases. That was a man who specifically wanted you to look at those receipts. See, the language was too direct. He paused. I think he knew something was off. See, I think he didn't have the time to figure out what it was, or maybe didn't have the confidence to walk into a bank and challenge their accounting without more to go on. See, but he knew enough to document it and put it where you'd find it. See, Clara looked at the table. He left me a lot of things to find, she said. See, I'm still finding them. That's not a bad thing, Silas said. See, no, she agreed, it's not. She looked up at him. See, he was looking at her with the steadiness that was his fixed characteristic, that she'd stopped finding impersonal because she'd come to understand it was simply how he showed care, not through gesture or performance, but through attention. See, full, sustained, unhurried attention. I want to ask you something, she said. See, and I want you to answer honestly, even if the honest answer is uncomfortable. See, all right, when you packed those things, she said. See, the knife and the socks. Were you actually leaving, or were you testing something? See, he looked at her for a long moment, the kind of long moment that contained its own answer, or at least the shape of one. See, I was going to leave, he said finally. That was real. See, the agreement was finished, and I didn't know if staying had any standing. See, any basis. He turned his coffee mug in his hands. See, but I wasn't testing you. I wasn't trying to get you to ask me to stay. See, that's not I don't do things that way. I know, she said. See, that's why I asked. I just didn't know how to stay without a reason you'd given me, he said. See, and then you gave me one. She looked at him. I told you I didn't want you to go. See, yes. That was enough. That was everything, he said. See, the word landed in the kitchen the same way our had landed in the truck 3 weeks ago, without drama, without performance, and with the specific weight of something true. See, Clara did not look away from him. She was not a woman who looked away from things. See, Silas, she said, I made a rule. I know. I made it because the last time I let this place be held together by love, it nearly destroyed me when that love was gone. She paused. See, not because love was wrong, because losing it was the most destabilizing thing that had ever happened to me, and I wasn't ready to be that unstable again. See, he was listening, fully completely the way he listened. See, but I've been thinking about the rule, she said. See, and I've been thinking about what it actually protected me from, which was, she stopped. See, found the right words. Not love, not the thing itself. See, just the fear of losing it. And I'm not sure that's a good enough reason for a rule anymore. See, no, he said quietly, I'm not sure it is either. See, I'm not saying it's simple, Clara said. I'm not saying we know what this is or where it goes. See, I'm not someone who I don't do things recklessly. See, this isn't reckless. I know it isn't. But I'm also not going to keep a rule that I made in desperation and call it wisdom, she said. See, that's not honest. And I'm an honest person. You are, he agreed. See, Something shifted in his expression, something that wasn't quite a smile, but was related to one. The look of a man who had been holding something carefully for a long time and was being given permission to set it down. See, Clara, I'm not asking you for anything you're not ready to give. See, I want to be clear about that. I know, she said. See, but I'm telling you that she paused, choosing the word carefully because she meant it precisely. See, willing to see what this is, without the rule telling me what it has to be. See, he looked at her across the kitchen table in the harsh overhead light, both of them tired from a winter day, and neither of them young enough to pretend that things were simpler than they were. And he said, I'd like that. See, good, she said. She picked up the dinner plates and carried them to the sink, and behind her she heard him push back his chair and stand up, and then he was beside her at the counter with the glasses. See, and they washed the dishes together without dividing it into whose task it was, because by now it wasn't a matter of division. See, it was just something they did. The compliance review concluded on a Thursday in the second week of February. See, Gerald Poole called at 9 in the morning. This time Clara was sitting at the kitchen table when he called, coffee in hand, Silas outside, the morning routine of the ranch already half completed. See, she picked up and listened. She did not write anything down this time. See, the numbers were in her head before he finished giving them. See, the 9 payments from the secondary account, properly applied, combined with the corrections from the first review, reduced the outstanding balance to a figure she had not believed possible 3 weeks ago. See, below the threshold that had been causing the lending committee concern. See, below the figure that had made the refinancing calculation precarious. See, below, in fact, the amount that the refinancing terms already signed, already in place, were designed to handle. See, the ranch's debt was real. It still existed. There was still work to do and money to manage carefully and years of careful operation ahead. See, Clara was not naive about that. She had never been naive about that. See, but it was manageable. Genuinely, actually, in the real world manageable. See, the corrected documents will be filed with the county by end of week, Poole said. See, the foreclosure proceeding is formally withdrawn. See, the refinancing terms stand, a pause, and Mrs. Whitlock, the bank, will be issuing a formal written apology for the accounting errors and their duration. See, I want you to have that on record. Thank you, mister. See, Poole, Clara said, I'll look for it. She hung up. See, she sat with both hands around her coffee mug and looked at the window, at the cold, bright morning outside, at the fence line that stood straight, at the barn that wasn't losing weather anymore. See, at the north pen, where the cattle were moving in that settled, unhurried way that meant they were fed and warm enough and had no immediate complaints. See, she heard the back door. Silas came in, unwrapping a scarf she hadn't seen him with, before something he'd found in the equipment room, probably an old thing of James's that she'd told him to use when the cold got serious. See, he stopped when he saw her face. Poole, he said. See, it's done, she said. The compliance review is finished. See, the corrected balance is filed. The foreclosure is withdrawn. She looked at him. See, it's done, Silas. He stood by the door with the scarf in his hands and the cold still coming off his coat, and for a moment his face did the thing she'd been watching it do for 3 weeks, that internal, private recalibration. See, the way he processed things that were large without letting them become a performance. See, then he crossed the kitchen and sat down across from her. See, he put his hands flat on the table. See, both of them. See, palms down. See, the gesture of a man arriving somewhere. See, it's done, he said. Yes. He looked at the table for a moment. See, your husband kept those receipts for 11 years. See, he did, in a shoebox under equipment catalogs. See, under the John Deere manuals, specifically, Clara said. See, which he knew I would never voluntarily open. Something crossed his face, the thing that was related to a smile, but deeper than one. See, then he trusted that you'd eventually look anyway. See, he always trusted that, Clara said. Sometimes before I trusted it myself. See, she got up and poured him coffee without asking if he wanted it, because she knew by now that he did. See, she put it in front of him and sat back down. We need to celebrate, she said. See, it came out slightly flat because she wasn't by nature a celebratory person and she knew it. See, I'm not sure I know how to do that. We could start with breakfast, Silas said. See, she looked at him. You want to celebrate the salvation of this ranch with breakfast. The real breakfast, he said. Not just eggs. Everything. See, whatever's in that cold storage that we've been rationing for winter. See, I'll make it. Clara thought about it. We have half a cured ham, she said. See, get it out. They made breakfast, everything in it. See, ham, eggs, the last of the dried apples she'd been saving, biscuits that she made from scratch, which took longer than it should have because she made too much dough the first time and had to adjust, and the biscuits still came out irregular. See, which was how her biscuits always came out and always would regardless of how many she made. See, Silas fried the ham and didn't hover over how she was managing the biscuits, which she appreciated. See, they ate at the kitchen table with the winter light coming in through the window and the ranch outside going about its quiet business. See, and it was not a romantic breakfast in any picture book's sense. There were still dishes from last night's dinner stacked at the side of the sink because they'd done a partial job and it had been late. See, and the table had a coffee ring on it that needed addressing. See, and at one point, the ham spit grease onto the stove and Silas said a word that Clara filed away as information about his vocabulary when the occasion called for it, but it was real and it was warm and it was theirs. See, she thought that word again. Theirs. She let herself think it this time. See, 2 days later, Douglas Vance came back. She had not expected him. See, she'd thought his last visit, the one after she'd come back from the bank with the accounting discovery, had been the final act of a man withdrawing a losing hand. See, but Vance was not a man who withdrew easily, which she supposed was how he'd built whatever empire of other people's desperation he was working from. See, he drove up in the black car at 10 in the morning. See, he was wearing the pressed shirt and the expensive coat. See, he had the professional smile. Silas was in the yard when he arrived, resetting a gate hinge that had been slightly off for weeks, finally getting to it now that the acute crisis had passed and there was time for the chronic maintenance. See, he looked up at the car, looked at Vance, and kept working. See, he didn't move toward the house. He didn't move away. See, he just stayed where he was, which was the right thing. See, Clara came out of the house. Mr. Vance, she said. See, you should know that the foreclosure proceeding was formally withdrawn 2 days ago. See, the smile didn't entirely disappear, but it revised itself into something else, something that was trying to read how final that statement was. See, I'd heard something to that effect, he said. I wanted to come by personally. See, to say that my group's interest in the property isn't contingent on financial distress. See, we're interested in the land itself if you ever decide you want to move on. See, I won't, Clara said. In the future, in any future I can currently imagine, she said, the answer is no. See, I'm not being rude, Mr. Vance. I'm being clear, which is a kindness that saves us both time. See, he looked at her. He looked past her at Silas, who was crouched by the gatepost with a wrench and was apparently entirely absorbed in what he was doing, which Clara knew was not entirely true. See, Vance looked at the fence line, the barn, the property that had transformed from a distress opportunity into something that clearly was not going to cooperate with his plans. See, you've done a lot of work here, he said. An honest observation, delivered with a grudging quality. See, we have, said. He nodded once, got in his car. See, drove down the ranch road. She stood in the yard until the sound was completely gone. See, then she turned and looked at Silas, who had put down the wrench and was looking back at her. See, we, he said. I said we, she confirmed. He picked up the wrench. See, good, he said. She went back inside and found that the coffee had finished brewing, and she poured 2 cups and brought one out to the yard and put it on the fence post near where he was working and went back inside. See, and neither of them made any particular point of it. See, the weeks after that were the weeks Clara would return to later, when she tried to understand how things had settled into what they became, not a single moment, not a conversation that declared anything. See, but a gradual and genuine shift from 2 people in an arrangement to 2 people in a life. See, It happened the way most real things happened, which was without a clean beginning you could point to, and without anyone announcing it. See, Silas moved more of his things into the house, slowly, practically. See, a jacket on the hook by the back door, the paperback on the kitchen shelf where she kept the books she was currently reading. See, his work boots by the door beside hers, the pattern so ordinary after 2 weeks that Clara's sister, calling from Phoenix, asked in a probing way who was staying out there with you, and Clara said, simply, see, my husband, which was the first time she'd used that word without the internal quotation marks she'd placed around it since Judge Hale's office. See, her sister was quiet for a moment. Is this the man you married, so the bank would leave you alone? See, that's the one, Clara said. Another pause. Clara. See, do you know what you're doing? Clara looked out the kitchen window, at the north fence line, where Silas was working a small figure in the winter light, doing something purposeful, always doing something purposeful. See, better than I've known what I was doing in a long time, she said. See, her sister made a sound that was skeptical and slightly worried, and also, underneath both of those things, something closer to relief. See, she'd been worried about Clara for 14 months. See, she could afford to still be skeptical. See, March came slowly, the way it always did in that part of the country, not spring, but winter beginning to loosen its grip by small degrees, patches of bare ground appearing at the south-facing edges of the pastures. See, the light coming at a slightly different angle by the end of the month that told the cattle something had shifted before it told the people. See, Clara filed the final refinancing paperwork in the first week of March. See, she drove to the bank and sat across from Poole and signed the documents that converted the temporary crisis management into a long-term sustainable debt structure she could service on what the ranch could genuinely produce. See, Poole handed her the copies and shook her hand. I want to say again, he said, that the bank should have caught these errors years ago. See, that's on us. What you did finding those documents, bringing them in, making us look at what we'd missed that took considerable persistence. See, it took my husband's receipts, Clara said. He did the work. See, I just found it. She drove home. On the way back, she passed the spot on the county road where the crossroads were, where the two directions diverged, one toward Silver Creek, one toward the highway that went north, toward Montana, see, toward the place Silas had been pointed when he'd turned up her road instead. See, she drove past it without stopping and turned onto the ranch road and drove until the house came into view. See, Silas was on the porch. He'd done something to the porch she hadn't asked him to do and hadn't expected, replaced the 2 boards that had been soft since last spring, the ones she'd been navigating around for a year. See, he'd done it that morning apparently, while she was in town. See, the new wood was brighter than the old, the contrast visible from the truck, those 2 solid boards among the weathered gray planks like something recently, deliberately mended. See, she parked and got out and stood looking at the porch. See, I should have asked first, he said. No, she said. See, you shouldn't have. She walked up the steps and across the new boards, feeling them solid underfoot, and went inside. See, he followed her in, and she put the copies of the signed documents on the kitchen table, the same table, always the same table, and she looked at them for a moment. See, these papers that meant the ranch was safe, was hers, was theirs, was not going anywhere. See, it's finished, she said. Is it, he said. She looked at him. See, he was leaning in the kitchen doorway with his arms crossed, and he was asking the question with a careful quality, because they both understood it had 2 meanings. The crisis was finished, yes, and also was the agreement? See, was the arrangement, was the thing they'd been in. See, no, she said, not the part that matters. He looked at her across the kitchen, the man who had arrived at her gate on tired feet and no road left, who had worked her land like it was his own before it was. See, who had given his last money for her cattle without ceremony and kept receipts that saved a ranch without knowing that was what he was helping to find. See, Clara, he said, I want to ask you something. Ask, she said. See, I'd like to stay. He said it plainly, the way he said everything that mattered. See, not because of the arrangement, not because the work needs doing, though it always does. See, because this is. He paused, and she recognized in the pause a man reaching for precise language in a way that was completely characteristic of him. See, because this place feels like somewhere I was supposed to get to. See, and because he stopped again, you make me want to stop moving. See, she stood in her kitchen in the coat with the frayed cuff and looked at him. See, she thought about the morning the foreclosure notice had come through the door. See, she thought about the decision she'd made in less time than she should have needed and told him she'd made it in too little time, which was the honest thing. See, she thought about Judge Hale's 9 minutes and Roy, the deputy, trying not to look at either of them. See, she thought about Harold Whitlock's ladder and the East Pasture grazing rotation and a shoebox full of receipts organized by James's emotional state and $6,200 in a sealed envelope under the John Deere manuals. See, she thought about a rule she had made and what she had made it for, and whether it had done its job or simply delayed the thing it was meant to prevent. See, which was this: a man in her kitchen doorway asking to stay, looking at her like she was worth staying for. See, the thing was, she realized that the rule had done exactly what she'd intended. See, it had protected her through the worst of it. It had held the line while she found her footing again, while she remembered who she was without James. See, while she discovered that she was still someone substantial enough to fight for a ranch and find receipts in a shoebox and drive through snow to a bank and say no to a land buyer in pressed boots and mean it. See, the rule had done its job, and now the job was finished. See, yes, she said, I'd like you to stay. He nodded once. See, not dramatically, not with the volume the moment might have had in a different kind of story. See, just a nod, the acknowledgement of a real thing said by a real person who meant it. See, then he said, your coffee's getting cold. You left it on the counter. See, she laughed. It came out more sudden than she expected, a real laugh, the kind that caught her before she could moderate it. See, she hadn't laughed like that in longer than she wanted to count. See, go get it then, she said. He pushed off the doorframe and went to the counter and poured her the coffee and put it in front of her, and she sat down at the kitchen table, and he sat down across from her. See, and outside the March light was doing its slow work on the snow at the south edge of the pastures, and the cattle were in the north pen eating the good feed they'd been eating for 6 weeks and showing it, and the fence line stood straight. See, what had happened here was not simple, and had not been simple at any stage of it. See, 2 people had met in desperation and made a cold-eyed practical agreement, and then found, despite every precaution, see, that people were not capable of being truly practical about each other for any extended length of time when they were in close proximity and both trying their best. See, something happened in that proximity. Not magic, she did not believe in magic, and she didn't think Silas did either. See, just the ordinary, difficult, irreducible human thing of one person witnessing another person fully, across a kitchen table and a fence line and a shoebox of receipts, in the winter, and the uncertainty and the daily work of keeping something alive. See, James had known she wouldn't give up on this place. See, he'd been right about that. He'd also left her in a sealed envelope under the John Deere manuals. See, the specific evidence she'd need to save it, which was either the most organized act of posthumous care she could imagine, or the most James thing that had ever happened in her life, and it was probably both. See, she looked at Silas across the table. We have the South Water Line to look at this week, she said. See, the pressure is still low since the freeze. I know, he said. See, I was thinking the inlet valve. It might have cracked. See, the Cavs need their second round of supplemental this month. See, already ordered. Pete Garvin said he'd have it Thursday. See, and the East Pasture rotation 2 more weeks, and we move them back, he said. See, let the South recover. She drank her coffee. He drank his. See, the kitchen was exactly what it was, worn and honest, and slightly in need of things that never quite got to the top of the list, and the ranch outside was exactly what it was. See, a working piece of land with a corrected debt balance, and 2 people who understood every foot of it. See, she had made a rule. No love. 2 words, clean and simple and completely reasonable given what she'd been through and how recently she'd been through it. See, she had broken it. They both had. Not carelessly, not blindly, but deliberately, the way you broke a rule that had served its purpose and needed to be retired. See, it turned out that was the only honorable way to break a rule, not because it was inconvenient, but because you'd grown past needing it. See, what had kept this ranch alive was not one thing. See, it was receipts in a shoebox, and a man who walked 14 miles on an empty stomach to ask for work instead of charity, and an inspector who climbed a ladder they hadn't expected him to climb and found solid boards, and a bank manager who, see, when confronted with evidence he couldn't dismiss, did the right thing, however slowly. See, it was a woman who knew how to say no to the right people and how to say yes to the right things, even when those things scared her, even when the timing was absurd. See, even when the sensible version of her was standing in the corner of her own kitchen, saying, "You don't know this man." See, she knew him now. She knew the cut in his jaw that was long healed. See, she knew the careful way he laid out tools. She knew that he read history in the evenings and woke up before sunrise and couldn't fully leave a thing unfinished. See, she knew that he would give his last money for livestock that weren't technically his without once mentioning he'd done it. See, she knew that when he said he didn't want to leave, he meant it in all the ways a person could mean something. See, the morning came in through the kitchen window the way it always did, without ceremony, without asking if they were ready, simply arriving, because that was the nature of mornings. See, the coffee was warm, the cattle were fed, the papers on the table were signed and legal and real. See, Silas picked up his mug. "South pasture after breakfast," he said. See, "South pasture after breakfast," she said. She finished her coffee. See, she stood up and carried her cup to the sink, and he stood up and carried his, and their elbows didn't collide this time, but they were close. See, close in the way that had stopped being accidental some weeks ago, and neither of them had commented on because it didn't require comment. See, she rinsed her cup. She hung it on the hook where it always went. See, outside the morning was getting on with the light moving, the cattle moving, the south pasture waiting with its low-pressure inlet valve and its particular demands, which were the demands of land that needed tending and always would. See, season after season, in the good years and the hard ones, which were the only two kinds of years there were. See, she put on the coat with the frayed cuff. She went out. See, he followed, and the door closed behind them, and the kitchen held its warmth in the quiet for a moment, and the ranch went on.